अविवेकी लोकांनी आपल्यावर युद्ध लादले. युद्धासाठी आनंद व्यक्त करणे योग्य नाही. प्रत्येक समस्याचा पहिला उपाय संवाद आणि मुत्सद्देगिरी हाच असावा. युद्धातून कोणाचाही खरा विजय होत नाही. शांतता हाच खरा विजय आहे, असं मत भारतीय सैन्याचे माजी लष्कर प्रमुख मनोज नरवण यांनी व्यक्त केलं आहे.
दी इन्स्टिट्यूट ऑफ कॉस्ट अकाउंटंट्स ऑफ इंडिया या देशातील अग्रगण्य संस्थेच्या पुणे विभागाचा हीरक महोत्सवानिमित्त आयोजित कार्यक्रमात नरवणे बोलत होते. रेंडवणे येथील डॉक्टर कलमाडी शामराव शाळेच्या शकुंतला शेट्टी ऑडिटोरियममध्ये कार्यक्रमाचे आयोजन करण्यात आले होते. किशोर पंप प्रायव्हेट लिमिटेडचे व्यवस्थापकीय संचालक किशोर देसाई, माजी अध्यक्ष CMA डॉक्टर धनंजय जोशी, इन्स्टिट्यूट ऑफ कॉस्ट अकाउंटंट्स ऑफ इंडिया माजी अध्यक्ष CMA अमित आपटे, माजी केंद्रीय समिती सदस्य CMA संजय भार्गवे, इन्स्टिट्यूट ऑफ कॉस्ट अकाउंटंट्स ऑफ इंडिया पुणे शाखा अध्यक्ष निलेश भास्कर केकान, केंद्रीय समिती सदस्य CMA नीरज जोशी, वेस्टर्न इंडिया रिजनल काउन्सिल माजी अध्यक्ष CMA चैतन्य मोहरीर आदी यावेळी उपस्थित होते. मनोज नरवणे म्हणाले, संरक्षणासाठी किती खर्च करावा आणि शिक्षण, आरोग्य, स्वच्छता यासाठी किती खर्च करावा हा वाद फार जुना आहे. संरक्षणातील खर्च ही उधळपट्टी नसून देशासाठी आवश्यक इन्शुरन्स आहे. सज्ज लष्करामुळे संघर्ष टळतो आणि स्थानिक अर्थव्यवस्थेलाही चालना मिळते. युद्ध महागडे असते, त्याची नुकसान भरपाई खर्चिक असते, म्हणून ही गुंतवणूक देशाच्या सुरक्षिततेसाठी आवश्यक असल्याचं त्यांनी सांगितलं. किशोर देसाई म्हणाले, देशासाठी आपण छोट्या प्रमाणात का होईना काही ना काही योगदान नक्की देऊ शकतो. सैन्याचा त्याग हा सर्वोच्च असतो, तो आपण करू शकणार नाही, पण त्यांच्या समर्पणातून आपण प्रेरणा नक्कीच घेऊ शकतो. व्यवसाय नेहमी एका स्वप्नातून सुरू होतो आणि त्यातूनच त्याचा प्रवास घडू लागतो. सामाजिक कार्य करत राहा, फक्त बॅलन्स शीटची चिंता करू नका, असंही त्यांनी सांगितलं. CMA चैतन्य मोहरीर म्हणाले, 1965 साली पुण्यात स्थापन झालेल्या या विभागाने आजवर 40,000पेक्षा अधिक विद्यार्थ्यांना मार्गदर्शन दिले असून 2200हून अधिक विद्यार्थी प्रमाणित कॉस्ट अकाउंटंट्स म्हणून घडवले आहेत. इन्स्टिट्यूट ऑफ कॉस्ट अकाउंटंट्स ऑफ इंडिया ही संस्था जागतिक स्तरावरील उद्योगांच्या आर्थिक नेतृत्वासाठी संसाधने आणि व्यावसायिकांची प्राधान्याने निवडलेली स्त्रोत संस्था असल्याचं त्यांनी सांगितलं. निलेश केकान यांनी प्रास्ताविक केलं. नीरज जोशी यांनी संस्थेच्या हीरक महोत्सवी वर्षाच्या प्रवासाबद्दल माहिती दिली.
But what happens when actually war breaks out? Then of course there is death and destruction. That will have its own costs, as I mentioned, the cost of rebuilding, but also the cost of the equipment which is lost. War and warfare is an expensive business. One Sukhoi aircraft costs about $50 million. Which can be lost in the blink of an eye. If you have a long drawn out conflict stretching into weeks and months, you can imagine what each loss would mean in the immediate terms and what each of these losses cumulatively added up would mean when you have to recoup that at the end of the war. These costs we can also see, like infrastructure I mentioned, residential buildings, airfields, bridges, roads, costs on the economic scene, a drop in industrial production, damage to crops, so they will also burn. And there is a third cost which I will talk about slightly later. To give you a rough idea, the Kargil war, almost 25-26 years ago, the expenditure includes whatever losses we suffered, plus whatever ammunition was fired. So that is also an expense. There came to 1,500 crore. Air Force was 800 crore. And the reconstruction costs only in the border areas of bunkers which were destroyed or roads which had to be remade, those were about 300 crore. And that was a comparatively small and localized war, not an all-out war between two countries. So these are the kind of costs that we have to look at when we a number of people are also asking that this cessation of military hostilities which has happened is that a good thing or a bad thing? Or should we have continued? Now, if you put your mind to the facts and figures which I have read out, you will realize that it is for the wiser person to take that call before the losses start becoming too large or insurmountable. And I think we proved it to Pakistan with the strikes we carried out, not only on their terrorist infrastructure, but also on their airfields deep within their territory, that the cost that they would have to bear if they were to continue on this very foolish path would be too much. And that is what forced their hand and ultimately resulted in their DGMO, that is the Director General of Military Operations, calling up our DGMO to discuss whether such a cessation is possible. But there is a third and more important component, and this is an intangible component. The first two were more tangible. You buy equipment, you can see it. You destroy something, you can again see that it has been blown to pieces. But there is a third, more important and intangible component, that is the social part. I did mention about the death and destruction, the social part, the lives that are lost, the children who lose their parents, children themselves who get killed in indiscriminate shelling in the border areas. Nobody really takes that into account. The displacement of populations that happen. In Ukraine, for example, all the women and children had to flee and are now staying in refugee camps all over Europe and doing menial jobs. Who is talking about that? Who is going to look after them? There is a lot of trauma, not only amongst the adults but amongst the children also. And this trauma amongst the children in the border areas who have seen this shelling, who now have to run for shelter every night, and those who would have lost their loved ones, that trauma will carry on for generations. There is also something called PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. People subjected to intense combat conditions and who have seen very gruesome scenes wake up even 20 years later bathed in sweat and need psychiatric care. So, ladies and gentlemen, war is not romantic. It is not your Bollywood movie. It is very serious business. And war or violence should be the last thing that we should resort to. And which is why our Prime Minister had said that this is not an era of war. Although wars will be forced upon us by unwise people, but war should not be what you cheer for. Again, people are asking that why did we not go for all-out war? But as a military man, if ordered, I will go to war. But that will not be my first choice. My first choice will always be diplomacy. How to settle differences through dialogue and not let it reach the stage of armed conflict. So I would leave you with that thought, that firstly, we are all equal stakeholders in this very important thing called national security. And secondly, we should try to resolve all our differences through dialogue not only between countries, but even amongst the differences that we have amongst ourselves, whether it is within the family or between states, between regions, between communities. Violence is not the answer. And take it from someone who has seen a lot of it.